Good evening, friends. It's with great pleasure that we welcome you to the fourth and the last day of the fifth Military Lit Fest 2021. This year, we were even more ambitious in our scope and presented 4 days of anecdotes and analysis with special focus on the war in 1971. The 71 war for the liberation of Bangladesh was a landmark conflict in the history of South Asia. It dramatically changed the map of the region and marked a historical revival of Indian military power in just 13 glorious and action packed days. This year's Military Lit Fest is dedicated to that stupendous victory.
We commence the last day of the festival with the race to Dhaka. The race to Dhaka during the 1971 war was a result of immaculate planning, decisive thrusts, and calculated risk taking that led to the abject surrender of the Pakistan military and the birth of a new nation. The fall of the city to the Indian Army on 16th December 1971 marked the creation of the independent state of Bangladesh with Dhaka as its capital. To shed light on the real incidents, we have with us Brigadier Onkar Singh Goraya, Brigadier P.K. Ghosh, and Major Chandrakant Singh, VRC.
Brigadier Onkar Singh Goraya is a gunner. He participated in all the three wars 62, 65 and 71. Brigadier Goraya has chronicled the lightning advance of Indian 4 Corps which led to the total capitulation of Pakistani forces. The book is titled Leap Across Meghna Blitzkrieg of 4 Corps 1971. Brigadier Goraya is a staunch atheist.
Brigadier P.K. Ghosh was a captain in 1971 and 2IC of 50 Parachute Brigade Signal Company. He went on a clandestine mission to infiltrate deep into East Pakistan at Tangail. He worked closely with Mukti Bahini to pass back information about Pak army movements between Tangail to the south and Jamalpur Maimansingh in the north. Brigadier Ghosh selected dropping zones for the para landing near Tangail and was responsible for security of these dropping zones.
Major Chandrakant Singh was a company commander and second in command of 4 guards which led to the infiltration behind enemy lines at Akhora. This was the biggest and only division-sized battle in the eastern sector. In addition, he led the advance and capture of Brahman Baria, the headquarters of Pakistan 14th Division. He was wounded in action in the Battle of Narsingdi. He is a Veer Chakra awardee.
I am Major Chandrakant, ex-4 Guards. I'm here at the Punjab Military Literature Festival, Chandigarh, to speak of my own and my battalion's experiences and actions in the 1971 war. Now, Bera Bazar was the headquarters of Pakistani 14th Division, commanded by General Abdul Majid, Qazi Abdul Majid. After the Pakistani withdrawal of 27 Brigade and the Div headquarters from Brahman Baria, they all concentrated at Bera Bazar. I think they had a total of about 6,500 troops, 1 brigade and plus the Div headquarters troops, and a couple of tanks in Bera Bazar. In our advance from Raipura, where we had crossed the Meghna River, towards Dhaka, Bera Bazar was in our rear and posed a threat to us. But fortunately, on the 10th of December, 19 Punjab had crossed over the river Meghna by ferries and had put a block south of Bera Bazar and a Mukti Bani battalion north of Bera Bazar. The remarkable thing is that these 2 battalions, without any artillery cover, for the rest of the war, for 7 days or 8 days, they contained 6,500 Pakistani troops who throughout these 7 days thought they were going to be attacked by our forces. During the day, the Indian Air Force fighter bombers, Nats and MiGs, not Nats but Hunters and MiGs would drop, if they had no other target, would drop whatever ammunition they had on Bharat Bazaar. And at night, it would be bombed by our transport aircraft, mainly the Caribous. They just pushed the bombs out into Bharat Bazaar. Fortunately, by then, all the civilians had run away from there. And so, as far as Abdul Majid was concerned, the divisional commander of the Pakistanis, he thought that he was under, his position was going to be attacked, threat. He took no countermeasures. I think Abdul Majid was a coward. I'd mentioned earlier that Brown Baria, in his div headquarters, we had found the bodies of 6 of our men from 10 Bihar with their hands tied behind the back. He had shot them, plus 45 Mukti Bahani people shot in the back with their hands tied in the back. That's not how a soldier should behave. 10th of December, it's an interesting thing. We had crossed the river on the 9th and 10th. On the 10th of December, according to Gavin Young, who was a reporter of the London Observer, I think, or the Telegraph, one of the British papers, reports that at 10 o'clock, after Niazi had heard of our crossing of the Meghna, he asked Yahya Khan and the United Nations representative in Dhaka to seek a ceasefire, which means that Niazi knew that he had no troops to defend Dhaka. Our path to Dhaka was open. Now, Gavin Young is a very interesting person. There's a lovely photograph of him with General Jacob and General Niazi, titled The Surrender Lunch. He was there when Jacob met Niazi, and he writes about it. And he also writes that the war should have ended on the 10th of December, because that is when Niazi had thrown in the towel. It lasted for almost 1 week more and had needless more deaths and wounded and casualties. And he's absolutely right, because after the 10th, at least in our sector, we had many skirmishes on our advance to Dhaka, but really there was no serious fighting. There were skirmishes. The advance continued on the 12th in all modes of transport. When the divisional commander saw that my battalion was now fully motorized, he requested the CO to shed half of the buses and trucks that we had for the rest of the brigade, which we did, but we still were completely motorized or on cycle rickshaws or something. And by the 12th evening, we had got to a place called Barpa, which is on the banks of the Lakha River, which is 12 kilometers from the heart of Dhaka. About Barpa, General Bajwa in his book mentions about this location, that on the 12th evening we had occupied Barpa and our patrols had entered Demra, which is the ferry point of Dhaka, and occupied the Adamji jute mills. On the 13th of December morning, we were joined by a party of 7 or 9 foreign journalists. The most prominent amongst them was Sidney Schanberg of the New York Times, who's written a wonderful story of his journey to join us. He's also covered part of the Garipur battle and also of the conduct of the Indian Army. He speaks very highly of the Indian Army. He says they did not, he saw an army, he says they did not, and he says he's seen the Americans in Vietnam, he has seen it. He says here was an army whose equipment was not very old and it was not very modern, it was old, but they made the best use of it. And in their behavior and conduct with either the Pakistani soldiers or with the local population, they did not put 1 foot wrong. That's there on record on Sidney Schanberg's report published in the New York Times on the 17th of December. Something that we should all be happy and proud of. Along with Sidney Schanberg was the photographer of the German magazine called Stern. He's of Indian origin, called J. Olal. Both J. Olal and Sidney Schanberg report of the final battle into Dhaka of the 13th and 14th. And the best part is, the same battle, one of the participants was a lady Mukti Bahani fighter. I forget her name, but I have a record and a video of hers recounting this final battle into Dhaka at the Adamji jute mills. Both Schanberg and J. Olal talk of a Pakistani officer coming out with a large white handkerchief or towel and waving a white flag of surrender. This is before the official surrender. Other sectors, the fighting continued. In our sector, we had a few skirmishes. We suffered casualties, about 30 odd casualties we suffered. But those are in the dying embers of a flame, which still is warm and hot. But they were of no things. We knew by the 14th that the Pakistanis had no option but to surrender. Because on the 14th morning, Major Shamsher Mehta, squadron of tanks, PT-76 tanks, which included 2 Pakistani tanks, which can be distinguished from our tanks by the white band around their turrets, gun turret, and by the Urdu markings on their hull. J. Olal has photographed them of firing into it, and Sidney Schanberg has mentioned about how these Pakistani tanks are firing on the Pakistanis themselves. And I was particularly happy about it because these same tanks had tormented me and run over my own one platoon of mine on the 2nd of December. 15th morning, of course, the ceasefire talks had started. Talks had started earlier, so on the 10th that started, but we knew that the ceasefire is now on because by then, 4 Corps had built up 3 brigades of 57 Div and 2 brigades of 23 Div on the outskirts of Dhaka. We were waiting for our artillery to come in and waiting for our further build-up ammunition. It's a whole thing because fighting in a built-up area is not a cakewalk. You suffer casualties, so build-up had to take place. But we knew that the Pakistanis, by then because we had captured a few Pakistani soldiers from the outskirts of Dhaka, that they really didn't have anything to think. They had troops. They had a total of 27,000 troops, but they were mainly administrative troops. They had depended, General Niazi had depended that 27 Brigade from Bhairab Bazar would withdraw into Dhaka, and the other brigade of Pakistan Army, which is from the northern sector, would have been able to withdraw into Dhaka for the defense of Dhaka. But that did not take place. One, it could not happen because if they moved in the day, our Air Force would have shot them up. Secondly, they were pinned down in their own battles. And thirdly, movement at night because of our own ambushes and the Mukti Bahani ambushes, the Pakistanis, for some reason, are reluctant to move at night. And this is something that we noticed not only in the eastern Bangladesh, but even in the western sector. Why it should be that way? But perhaps they did not take night fighting seriously in their training. On the 16th morning, orders were given, received. Sagat came himself. He came on the 15th, joined us. In fact, he came on the 13th first time and then again on the 15th and again on the 16th. Pilot as usual, then Captain Sehota, and said, send a company to the race course, to the airfield or race course, I forget, to give a guard of honor to the army commander when he arrives. A company mounted on Shammi Mehta's tanks proceeded to the race course. Now, the race course was overrun with the local Bengalis. Thousands and thousands, if not tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands. First job of theirs was to clear the race course and empty out the space for the surrender thing to take place. Shammi Mehta's tanks, on which the foreign correspondents travelled. We have a very nice photograph of this foreign correspondents all mounted on the tanks. One of the tanks was placed outside the Dhaka Intercontinental Hotel, which had been declared the Red Cross neutral zone, in which the erstwhile governor Malik was there, plus a lot of United Nations and foreign people had taken shelter. That was mounted there along with our troops. And this company that had been sent to give the guard of honor was then ordered to lay a protective cordon around the place where the surrender was to take place. The rest is history.
The advance to Dhaka started. It was a race. It was a race to chase the Pakistanis. We were on their heels and they were running. There was hardly any opposition on the road axis. Now from Narsingdi to reach Dhaka, there were two approaches. One was a road on which 311 Brigade was advancing on foot, helped by a few transport here and there, cycle rickshaws and any type of transport that they could get hold of, and supported by 65 mountain regiment, which deployed en route wherever there was some opposition, there was a requirement to fire. On the other axis, from Narsingdi, a railway line of middle gauge, it went firstly west and then south. Generally the direction was southwest. It entered Dhaka via Tumbi. The 73 Brigade was given orders to advance on that brigade, and it was to be supported by 59 Mountain Regiment of ours. Now, the Mountain Regiment could not move on the railway line. They couldn't even push the guns. So, ingenuity was used to the extreme. We had, this regiment had one officer by the name of Percy Dice, Captain Percy Dice, who had earlier served in the railways before being commissioned. He had some knowledge how to operate the train. Now he collected a few bogies on the railway line, joined them up, and also managed to start a derelict engine somehow. He hooked up the train and we christened that train as 59 Combat Special. That is after the name of the regiment. On this train, it had a number of bogies, covered wagons, it had flat wagons, and all sorts of wagons which came on the way were hooked up. The guns were deployed on the flat wagons, ammunition was put in the covered wagons. Initially, the train was pushed by manpower, and later on, when Percy managed to get an engine, then it was a proper train run by engine with telephones, telephone lines between the front and the rear, wherever the train had to be halted, and so on. This train marched on, and the brigade advanced, and even the infantry was given an opportunity to put their heavy loads on the same train. Ultimately, on the 16th, when the ceasefire took place, this was the first train to land up in Tumbi railway station near Dhaka. I established my command post nearby at a place called Barpa, that village Barpa. Now, there I calculated from the map that the medium guns could reach the outskirts of Dhaka. Now, in the meantime, I got a call from my commander and the GOC to meet them at Narsingdi. I drove back to Narsingdi in my auto, three-wheeler. I met them there, and they gave me orders that you must shell Dhaka to tell General Niazi, Pakistanis, that we are so close as to be able to shell you with our artillery. We are within artillery range of you. Okay, so that is, I thought of it, how do I do this? I acquired a town map of Dhaka, and from the map I selected a few places where I suspected that the army barracks or the cantonment would be, or the defenses of the Pakistanis would be. That is the close defenses of Dhaka. Now I selected those places as target. I also took care to avoid a few places which were declared as by the Red Cross, International Red Cross, as no targets. That means we were forbidden to fire on those places because the foreigners, international community, the various embassies and the other foreigners, that is Americans and nationals of other countries, had been told to gather, and that place was out of bounds as far as our artillery and Air Force was concerned. So avoiding those places, there were 9 places which I marked in red on my map. Now I selected the other places and I gave a task table to my medium guns, giving them enough ammunition and telling them to go all out to put as many rounds as possible into Dhaka so that General Niazi can hear the bang of our guns. Apart from shelling Dhaka outskirts with our artillery, the Air Force also came to know that the Governor Malik of East Pakistan was holding a conference in his residence on the 14th morning, 14th December. Now, immediately a mission got ready, a mission of 4 aircraft from Guwahati, and they were told to shell that place. And right in the middle of the conference, these fighter aircraft of the Indian Air Force, they swooped down on the governor's house and they played merry hell into that building. And the governor and General Niazi and other generals and all the VIPs, they had to take shelter under the table, under the conference table. That is how they saved their life. Now, that was the last, you can say, straw on the camel's back. The governor was totally shaken and he resigned then and there on an ordinary piece of paper and gave it to General Niazi. He says, hereby, I am no more your governor, you are in charge. And he went away to Intercontinental Hotel, which was in neutral area. And thereafter, Niazi, the choice was left to Niazi to accept the surrender offer or decide to fight. Now, there was no fight left in Niazi. Thereafter, he raised a hand, and in the meanwhile, we all know how General Jacob landed up on the 15th or the 16th morning in Dhaka, and he browbeat Niazi into signing the surrender document, into agreeing to sign the surrender document. Now, that is how the whole game ended.
I am Brigadier P.K. Ghosh, VRC VSM, commissioned in the Corps of Signals. On 14th morning, the advance started, and Brigadier Clare, who was the brigade commander, made it very clear that look, 2 corps has made some progress, but it's still nowhere near Dhaka. 4 corps, having crossed Meghna, is making good progress. They may take another few days to reach Dhaka, but we got a clear run, I think, because the enemy has fallen back, could not take up defenses at Tangail to delay us further, and now possibly has withdrawn to Dhaka. So I expect no more resistance from between Tangail and Dhaka. That was his assessment. The advance started on 14th, and on 15th evening, 15th evening, I had put my boys with the radio sets, and they had very high frequency sets, they had high frequency sets, and they had ground to air communications. I said, we start monitoring all the frequencies. By this time, if you will recall, those who have been following this, from the 11th or 12th onwards, General Sam Manekshaw, or Field Marshal Sam Manekshaw, had started sending a message to Niazi to surrender. That would be honorable way of surrendering. Indian Army will follow all the customs and traditions of war. You've lost the battle. No need to prolong the agony for all concerned. This message was constantly going through all the media, and Pakistani Army was obviously getting it. On 15th evening, one of my boys intercepted a message on high frequency from General Niazi to all troops to say that he had decided to lay down arms immediately, and they would have to follow his orders. So now we were assured that the Eastern Army, Pak Army, was completely deflated. We decided to press home for Dhaka, but our worry was whether the forward troops who we would meet as soon as we approached Dhaka had got that message or not. I recall that on 16th morning, we had reached Mirpur Cant. There was the Mirpur Creek in front of us, and there was the Mirpur Bridge. At this time, 2 Para Battalion was leading the advance. We halted just short of this, and we took stock of the situation. And it was the view that Mirpur Bridge was primed for detonation. They would blow it up in our faces and not allow us to enter Dhaka. Some confabulation took place between General Clare and the battalion commanders, and the sum total of it was that we decided that instead, to avoid confusion, we would send an officer with a white flag to Mirpur to tell them that, look, this is the message Niazi had sent you all. You must lay down arms, no need to fight anymore, and we will take over the entire situation. Nirbhay Sharma then was the adjutant of 2 Para, who later on rose to be the Lieutenant General Nirbhay Sharma, Master General of Ordnance, and later on he was the governor of Arunachal and Mizoram as well. Nirbhay took a jeep, raised a white flag, went off at a fast clip to Mirpur. We were watching through binoculars. He was immediately apprehended by the troops over there. And when he explained the situation, first of all they didn't believe him. Eventually he prevailed, as it transpires, and he was taken to the headquarters near the Ramna race course, where he explained that our troops had already reached Mirpur and he must send somebody from the headquarters to Mirpur to tell the troops to lay down their arms now. We did not want any bloody fighting at this point of time. General Jamshed, the GOC 16, the Pak Dev, came along back with Nirbhay, in fact, to Mirpur to receive us. And we all entered Dhaka with 2 Para leading. I was very much there, just in the leading elements. At 9:30, I recall, we entered Dhaka, being the first troops, Indian troops, to enter Dhaka on that day. Just as an aside, just for a matter of interest, General Sagat, who was the GOC 4 Corps, and he was just a few hours away from Dhaka, saying that he was now in charge of the entire situation in East Pakistan. Nobody was to make any more advances without his orders. However, we sensed that Brigadier H.S. Clare saw the prize before him and he was not going to let go. So we ignored that order, we pressed on, and at 9:30 we entered Dhaka. By about 10 o'clock, we had reached their headquarters, and Brigadier Clare and Colonel Pannu had met there General Niazi and his staff. We were there very much. We were offered a cup of tea by the Pak Army. Rest of the troops had gone to the race course and set up their barracks over there, bivouacs over there. A telephone conversation ensued between Brigadier Clare and Headquarters Eastern Command, and it was decided that General Jacob would fly in immediately, which he did within a few hours. And that is the time it was decided. Jacob laid down the procedure that would be followed, that the instrument of surrender would be signed. The protocol being that the event would take place in a public domain, in a public space, with the public watching. And it was decided to go for the race course, which is quite close to the Hotel Intercontinental, Dhaka Intercontinental. And General Arora would come in at the appointed time, fly in directly from Calcutta. He will be received by General Niazi. Two contingents will be formed. One, the Indian contingent, formed by 2 para-battalion officers, JSOs and men, and one, a Pak Army contingent. They would be inspected by General Arora. And then both Niazi and Arora would proceed to the table laid out in front of this contingent where the instrument of surrender would be signed. By 4 o'clock, General Arora had come, and General Niazi ceremonially handed over his pistol to General Arora. And I was a part of the Indian contingent. They inspected both the contingents. General Niazi saluted General Arora, and they moved to the table to sign the famous instrument of surrender, which the picture has become since so famous, the 1971 war, the signing ceremony. With that ended, of course, our part in the war.
The 1971 Bangladesh Liberation War is considered as the finest example of cohesive war fighting. It is the only war that saw all 3 wings of the Indian defense, the Army, Navy and Air Force, fighting together in multiple theatres. Indeed, the political class, the Army, Navy, Air Force, intelligence agencies, as well as paramilitary forces came together to pull off a victory that caught the world by surprise. It was a triumphant success for Team India. To discuss this marvelous synergy in detail, we have with us on the panel Mr. S.S. Boparai, IAS, Major General Pushpendra Singh, Major Chandrakant Singh, VRC, and Brigadier Onkar Singh, Goraya.
Mr. S.S. Boparai, IAS, served as Deputy Commissioner Firozpur, Punjab from 1971 to 75. He was at Fazilka when the war started, providing crucial support for 2 days during critical phase of Fazilka battle. Mr. Boparai is decorated with a Kirti Chakra and a Padma Shri.
Major General Pushpendra Singh has vast experience in strategy, disaster management and leadership at very senior levels. He is the author of numerous treatises and analysis of strategy and diplomacy issues. A national level horseman, he is also keen on wildlife.
I'm Major Chandrakant, ex-4 Guards. Our ability or my company's and my own little contribution in that of being able to infiltrate deep inside Pakistani territory and get behind the enemy lines and put an effective block at Akhora for 4 or 5 days and repeatedly beat back the Pakistani infantry, artillery, armored and aerial attacks on our company positions without giving up our positions, in spite of having suffered heavy casualties in dead and wounded is what was recognized and for which I was given the Veer Chakra. I would prefer not to talk more about oneself because I honestly feel it is a collective action. I'm sitting here very proudly displaying my pile of medals on my chest. But I honestly believe that every Indian has an equal right to wear similar medals on his chest and be proud of them. Every soldier and every civilian in Indian, man, woman and child. My own experience of our own countrymen, of whom the army, soldiers, airmen, navy sailors are representative of, their conduct in the war was exemplary. Exemplary in fighting. How many people, how many nations can say in 14 days they won an absolute victory? Taking 1 lakh prisoners and liberating and creating a country which never existed in war? Is there any similar record in our own Indian history? None. Our soldiers, sailors and airmen did it in 1971. But more than that, the victory and creating a new nation is, unlike other armies, when they occupy a victory and occupy another country, the conduct of our soldiers is so exemplary. At least I did not hear, and I have it on record from the local Bengalis, that during our occupation in Bangladesh, not one woman was molested by our troops in Bangladesh. It cannot be said of the American troops in Afghanistan or in Iraq, or by the so-called Canadian troops in Somalia or Norwegian troops with the United Nations. It is only our own Army, Navy and Air Force, though in occupation, behaved in the most honorable and exemplary manner with the local population. That is something every Indian needs to be proud of. Secondly, the surrender took place on the 16th of December. On the 22nd of December, the Bangladesh government in exile, headed by Mr. Tajuddin Ahmed, arrived in Dhaka. I was there because I had then been released from the military hospital. I received them. General Sagat, who was a de facto governor of Bangladesh, or at least a greater part of Bangladesh by then, handed over the reins of government of Bangladesh to the representatives of Bangladesh. We as an army did not govern Bangladesh. In fact, Sagat became a little unpopular because a small group from Eastern Command had come there to help with the administration of Bangladesh. And de facto, it wasn't just soldiers, it was a group of foreign affairs men. Sagat sent them back to India. He said, we should not behave like an army in occupation. The Bangladeshis' civil administration is capable of looking after and taking care of Bangladesh themselves. And that is within 1 week thing. The Americans in 20 years in Afghanistan were not able to do it, nor could they do it in Iraq in 1 week. On the 10th of January, 1972, when Sheikh Mujibur Rahman was released from jail and came to Dhaka, I was there for the security of the airfield. The plan was that we would provide a guard of honor. General Sagat said, no, let the Mukti Bahani provide the honor. Let Mujibur Rahman feel that he is returning to a truly liberated country governed by their own people, not by the people of India. That is something that has paid us dividends, and that is what we should be proud of. The other thing that we should be proud of, as I said before. When I was wounded, I was in the hospital. I find a Pakistani soldier in the bed next to mine, being treated exactly in the same way as our own soldiers, including our officers, were being treated. Our doctors were true to the Hippocratic Oath. That is something that we should be proud of. And that is, I think, the way for humanity, not only India, for humanity and all over the world to learn.
I'm Major General Pushpendra Singh from the Gunners, and I was commissioned in 1964 and hence was part of the 1971 war. In August 1971, I was teaching the long gunnery staff course officers at the School of Artillery, Devlali. The first inkling we got that war clouds were gathering was when the course was cancelled and all officers were returned to their units. Soon thereafter, we were called to the school headquarters and told to proceed on temporary duty to Talbet and report to 36 Maratha Light Regiment. When we asked that what is the nature of the temporary duty, they either wouldn't or couldn't tell us. Then Kultar asked, how long is the duty for? They said, we don't know. Anyway, at night we reached Talbet and were ordered to report to the regimental parade ground at 7:30 the next morning. When we arrived at the parade ground, there was a most amazing sight. There were about a dozen or more L-flies which were pitched end to end and tables and chairs laid out under them. And on this, there were a whole lot of ordnance and AME NCOs and GSUs with a sprinkling of officers present there. In front of this table, there was a large number of heavy crates. The unit collection party had gone to Bombay port and received this equipment, brought it in the train and reached only the night before. Now, a most astonishing display of efficiency that I've ever seen in my 39 years of service awaited us. As the crate was opened, it revealed a very large mortar, which was the 160 millimeter Soltam mortar. And when each part was uncrated and taken out, the ordnance and AME huddled together to identify the part and carry out a joint inspection of that particular part, which was then duly receipted by the ordnance and the inspection report duly filled in by the EME at all stages and echelons, right from the embarkation headquarters, that is Army headquarters, down to the Div Ordnance Unit or the Divisional Ordnance Unit, and further to the regimental headquarters, and then the mortars were issued to each color battery. Within that day itself, the whole process, which would normally have taken several weeks, if not months, was completed in just about 24 hours. By the afternoon, each of the batteries had received one mortar. Now the three instructors in gunnery, or ISG, that is Major Kultar and myself from the school, and Major Navet, who was commanding a battery also and an IG in the unit, got together with the men, and we were very, very puzzled about this most unique mortar. It shouldn't have been the case because the regiment was already equipped with a 120 millimeter mortar. But this mortar had three very unique features. The first was that in the 120 millimeter mortar, the carriage, which is on wheels, is detached, and the mortar comes in action on its base plate and a bipod. But here in the 160 millimeter mortar, the wheels just wouldn't detach. So we didn't know how to bring this into action. The second distinguishing feature was that the barrel was very long, and when it was elevated, because the mortar generally fires between 45 degrees to about 90 degrees elevation, no one could reach it even with the arms fully outstretched. So it was obvious that it had to be loaded in a horizontal position. Then, with Indian ingenuity and jugaad and the Maratha keenness, we soon discovered that when you turn the wheels inward, the mortar can be traversed on the wheels itself. So it doesn't require the wheels to detach. And secondly, there was an elevating gear which had a handle in the middle of it. When you pull the handle, the barrel collapsed and could be easily loaded. The other interesting feature was that while the barrel was collapsed, the layer who is sighting the mortar and setting it in the correct elevation and direction which is required to hit the target, he could continue working. So the layer could continue doing his job while the mortar was being loaded. And it couldn't be loaded by a single person, as it was the case in the 120 millimeter mortar, but it required a team to load it because the shell or the bomb was 84 pounds in weight. By the evening, we had figured out how to bring the mortar into action and had worked out a rough gun drill. The next morning, by the middle of the morning, all 18 mortars had been issued to each of the three color batteries, that is 6 each, and we worked out a gun drill for everyone to do, and we started practicing this gun drill. On the third morning, the Director General Artillery, Major General Vishisht, then designated Director Artillery, arrived to visit the unit, and at the same time the foreign experts who were Israelis, they also arrived. The commanding officer, then Colonel B.B. Kumar, reported to the Director Artillery that the equipment arriving from Finland has been collected by the unit, brought to the unit location, duly receipted and inspected from all echelons right down to the unit level and issued to the color batteries. And after this, the foreign experts and the Director Artillery were given a short presentation, or a demonstration rather, on gun drill by bringing one battery into action, recording the center of arc, recording the mortar on a designated fictitious target, firing, cease firing, and then scooting off. A point to note was that this weapon was very simple. Once the fire mission was over, you simply collapsed the mortar, opened the wheels into traveling position, hooked it up and went. So this was the first shoot and scoot equipment I had seen, and this was even before, many years before, the term had even been invented. The DGRT was suitably impressed by the proficiency and enthusiasm with which the unit had approached this task and learnt in a short time of 1.5 days how to operate the equipment. After he left, we got into a huddle with the foreign experts, and they presented us with a training program of 8 weeks. Then Major Randhir Navet said, "What nonsense." He says, "We are carrying out live firing next Thursday," which was just a week away. And thereafter, we are moving to our operational location. The foreign experts who were Israelis should not have been surprised, having seen what all we had achieved in a short day and a half, even in their absence. But I'm sure they were astonished. And the final regimental exercise went off flawlessly. We deployed in the Babina ranges for the firing. Due to peacetime safety reasons, the observation post was located at least 2 kilometers away from the target area. And when the firing commenced, the rounds landed and we could feel the shock of the explosion in the pit of our stomachs. Imagine what the enemy on whose head they were landing would feel. This was because this mortar had an 84-pound shell, and being a lighter weapon, low muzzle velocity weapon, it packed 3 times the amount of high explosive that a medium artillery shell packed. After the ceasefire, the Pakis were trying to take back some minor positions to improve their defensive position. And 160 millimeter fire was called for. We fired on them, and the forward defensive localities, or FDLs, of the neighboring company were shaken. The company commander of the neighboring company had been traumatized by 14 days of intense war. So when his FDLs were shaking, he called, "Who's firing?" So he was told that the 160 millimeter mortar was firing. So he said, "For God's sake, please stop the firing." So if you can imagine what our own troops were feeling when more than a kilometer away, and what the Pakis would be feeling when the mortar shells were landing on their head. It was a devastating weapon. What I'd like to say here was that usually the combat units are highly efficient in their job, and they feel let down by the lackadaisical attitude of the support units, and particularly the civil services. But in this particular case, you could see that from the port handling the equipment coming from Finland to the railways moving this equipment right up to Talbot in the shortest possible time, the entire echelons of Army headquarters, right from embarkation headquarters down to the LRW and the DIV Ordnance Unit, were working as a well-oiled team, an efficient machine. Now, when such a atmosphere of efficiency is displayed, naturally the combat unit gets enthused. And I think this is due to the singular leadership of our Army Chief, Field Marshal Sam Manekshaw, complemented by the civilian leadership of Indira Gandhi. The whole nation came together as one to produce this feeling of invincibility, and that is why we were able to liberate Bangladesh in just less than 2 weeks. If anything, It's the Ministry of External Affairs which was slightly delayed in getting the foreign experts to our location, maybe 2 days later. But it could also be due to the fact that the rest of the echelons worked with such efficiency that we were ready 2 days before the foreign experts were due to land. And it was in this spirit of teamwork, the whole nation approach, that we won the war in 1971.
Now, in the end, I must say a few words about the role of the Air Force. Throughout the war of 42 weeks, our Indian Air Force were ruling the skies. We, on the ground, had no fear of the enemy aircraft. Only in the first 2 days, that is 1st and 2nd December, a few sorties were flown by the PAF, but they were also shot out of the sky by the Indian Air Force, and thereafter we were the masters. That is why our helicopters could fly without any fear of interference from the enemy. Our convoys could move, our infantry could march on the roads, we could do anything. There was absolutely no fear from the enemy's aircraft. And the final act, the feather in the cap of the Air Force, was that raid on the governor's house on the 14th morning, which convinced Nyasi that the game was up. The wonderful role, even which surpasses the performance of the fighter, was played by the helicopter units. They lifted a 2/3 of my division from Brahmanbaria to Narsingdi in a matter of 2.5 days, including nights. Over 135 sorties were flown, on the average 15 sorties per machine. And mind you, there were only 10 helicopters which were able. Out of those also, some were not a single casualty. Some became grounded during the operation, but they were back again within 12 to 24 hours. Now that was a wonderful feat on part of 110 helicopter unit of the Air Force. I must mention that in this war, the generalship shown by Indian senior officers was of an outstanding caliber. Our generals, our commanders, I must name a few in my sector: General Sagat, the Corps Commander; my GOC General Chalves, Brigadier Mishra of 311 Brigade; my own commander, Brigadier Janjeet Singh Bawa, called Jangi Bawa; and Colonel Himmat Singh, the CEO of Four Guards. They deserve all the kudos for being always up at the front, commanding the troops. In fact, General Sagar, quite often, he flew over and landed behind the enemy lines when our forces were advancing, and he would go and land next to the vanguard, the very vanguard of the advancing troops, and shake hands with the major commanding that particular company or platoon. That was the type of support, that was the type of daring that General Sagar showed. A number of times his helicopter was shot up, and he just got saved by a fluke. That is what was, to a large extent, responsible for the outstanding victory that the Indian Army achieved. General Sagar Singh, who had already earned a very big name during the operations in Goa in 1961, a fight with the Chinese in 1967. He was a great commander. It was he who decided not only to achieve the aim given to him. The aim given was to advance up to the Meghna River. He decided to jump the Meghna River, and when General Ranjit Singh Arora, the army commander, told him not to do that, he defied him. He said, Jaggi, I am giving you something more. I am giving you Dhaka on a plate. And he really did that. And in a matter of 2 weeks, if Bangladesh was liberated within that short period, most of the credit should go to General Sagat Singh.
I want to say that I stayed on Fazilka because on the very first night, the bridge on the Satluj at Fazilka, Hussainiwala, got blown up. So Firozpur, in my opinion, was safe. And I therefore stayed in the critical period of the first 2 days when Fazilka was attacked. So, so we went to the brigade commander, and towards the evening, the JCO came running, and then a captain came running. Sir, they've gone onto the Malot Road. And this was behind us. And it was just like what the PAP commandant, the BSF commandant had told us. Now, what happens in war is that if you rely too much on smugglers for information, they act both way agents for their survival. So this was probably false information conveyed to the army and conveyed by the BSF commandant to us, and withdrawals began to order. Luckily, when this order went to the army commander, that an order was being given to withdraw to Fazilka and fight within Fazilka, he immediately countermanded the order. I was still sitting with Brigadier Chaudhary at that time. And in front of me, the Brigadier Chaudhary ordered the formations. Actually, they had started withdrawing from one place and said, please call them back and go back. We have to fight wherever we were. I then took his leave and went over to the Sadr police station where we used to be with the 70-odd Fazilka dwellers who were left back with us. And then I came to know that a counterattack was coming, and I had made earlier a request to the brigade commander that I would like to see the fireworks. So he called me to Kannar Rest House, where the GOC of the Foxtrot sector, General Ram Singh, was there. He was briefed, and he had been spoken to by brigade commander, and he had permitted that I can come with him. When we got up to go, General Ram Singh said, Swaran, if something happens to you, it will bother me. Now, General Ram Singh had lost his son-in-law in the army attack in Bangladesh some 3 weeks earlier, and he had never mentioned this to us. He was a believer in God. He used to do a lot of part, and it is from his staff that I had come to know. So when he said this to me, I took it immediately. I said, sir, it's all right, I will not go. And I bid him farewell, to go and good luck. I think in 1 hour or 2 hours, he came back with 3 bullets in his leg here. We took him to the hospital, civil hospital. He was operated in the civil hospital. And Dr. Garg, who later on got a Shaurya Chakra also, he operated upon him. Now, what I want to say is that my being there and insisting on it, that I will be here only, helped in retention of all these services, the civil services, of the telephone exchange, of the medical services, of everything else. Now, we were sitting in the Sadr police station when the telephone exchange people rang up the SDM. SDM said, sir, they want to run away. They said it's very dangerous because they keep on hearing everything on the telephone through the exchange, and they say they are going away. I said, talk to them not to go, but he could not persuade them, so I took the phone from him. I told them, I said, I am here, my government wants me in Firozpur, but I am here only so that you can stay here and serve the army. So please understand, and in case we have to evacuate, I'll first of all get you out and then look after myself. But no, they were adamant. So I howled at him. I said, next time I hear from you that you want to go out, I will come and personally shoot you. This silenced them, and there was no demand. By this time, there was a call from Chandigarh, from our Chief Secretary, very kind gentleman, Mr. R.S. Talwar, who had actually specially put me at Firozpur. He said, Swaran, you have to go back to Firozpur. That's your district headquarters. I said, sir, Firozpur, in my opinion, after the bridge is blown off to Seniwala, is safe. And here I am needed. I am doing service for the army, and my services will be retained in case I am here. They must go through these early difficult time with me. He understood, but soon after there was a telephone from our advisor to the governor, Mr. I.D. Ansari, who was an ICS officer and had come specially from Chandigarh in the governor's rule. He was like our chief minister at that time. And he said, Swaran, you to get back. I said, sorry, I'm needed. He said, this is an order. I apologized to him. I said, sorry, sir, I will not leave Fazilka. I'm needed here, and I'm sorry. And I stayed on, but this ensured that all the services that were meant to be delivered, and when the GOC was injured, it was not the army which treated him, it was the civil which treated him. And next morning, then afternoon, we left for Firozpur. On the way, we found some people who had got together around a truck. So the SSP asked his ASI accompanying him to go and find out what's happening. He said, sir, the truckwala is overcharging. So the SSP, Mr. Ravikant Sharma, said, okay, go and burn up that truck. I do not know whether that truck was burnt up or not, but after that, there was no complaint from our district of any black marketing, of any overcharging. And we back to Firozpur, and there a big mishap took place. General Bakshi of the fort in Dev, he had gone to Motam, the BSF post there, and on his return, he got blown up on an anti-tank mine. I rushed to the hospital, met him. He was in good condition. The big toe was injured, and he was evacuated. He was replaced by General Onkar Singh Kalkat, who was a very dashing officer, and I had an exposure to him earlier in my army attachment in Titwal area. He had been to all the high as brigade commander then. He had been to Nagina 1, Nagina 2, Nagina 3, all the high posts there, and mixed with the... He used to take a bottle and put rum in the mouth of the soldiers posted there. It was a great thing for a soldier to be looked after by his brigade commander like that. He was a great commander. So he had now joined in place of General Bakshi in 14 Dev. So he asked me that he wants to know the route which smugglers take into Pakistan. So we had put all the smugglers of the district in behind bars under the NSA. So we retrieved them from there and put the army in touch with them so that they could tell them which way to go, etc. There was high elephant grass. He said, can you have them cut? So we asked our people, they got together and they cut whatever they could cut the Sakanda. The idea is to say that we never said no to the army. And that is why all the army generals, and there were 4 of them, they said, you feel like fighting in this state. That is the motivation which can come to the army from the people of a place. And that is how it went on. And the war ended on 17th, I think. And let me say that I've learned a lot from the senior army officer of man management, how to manage your people, how to manage people below from whom you have to take work, how they call even a junior most JCU as Saab, or even a soldier as a Saab. I know my SSP would sometimes call them maa behan ki gali also. But the way to command is definitely the best in the army and the other forces too. It was a great experience for them. When the war ended, of course, the next was resettlement. The government of India was very kind. They sent us in those days 8 crores of rupees, which we distributed. And in my district, there was not a single complaint because I found my own thieves by myself and punished them. I had one of them thrashed by the police before I would take administrative action against him. So there was absolutely no inquiry in my district, whereas in the other 2 bordering districts, there were complaints and there were inquiries. It was a great time, and it's very nice to remember those days, but I really wish that there's no war ever. It's a foolish exercise anytime.
In this episode, we talk about 2 military leaders who shaped the victory of 1971, Field Marshal Manekshaw and Lieutenant General Sagat Singh. Field Marshal Sam Harmasji Framji Jamshedji Manekshaw, Military Cross, widely known as Sam Manekshaw and Sam Bahadur, was the chief of the army staff during the Indo-Pak War of 1971 and the first army officer to be promoted to the rank of a field marshal. Lieutenant General Sagat Singh PVSM was a general officer in the Indian Army, notable for his participation in liberation of Goa and later in Bangladesh. He held many command and staff appointments throughout his military career. To talk about both these personalities, we have with us Lieutenant General Raj Shukla, who is a gunner with close to 4 decades of outstanding service record. He is presently GOC&C Army Training Command at Shimla.
I'm Lieutenant General Raj Shukla, General Officer Commanding in Chief, Army Training Command. Friends, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, a very good evening. It's a great pleasure to be back at the Chandigarh Military Lit Fest and to be speaking on the leadership attributes of 2 of our most outstanding soldiers. Gentlemen who played a critical role in the scripting of our glorious triumph in 1971. Leaders extraordinaire, Field Marshal Sam Manekshaw and Lieutenant General Sagat Singh. I shall refer to them hereafter as Sam and Sagat, not on account of any deliberate impropriety or because I wish to take any liberties, but merely in order to save time and out of deep affection for those 2 gallant soldiers. My gratitude to the organizers of the Lit Fest for both the opportunity and the invite. Well, let me begin by stating that the pantheon of Indian military leadership is wide, varied, and very rich. In terms of sheer repertoire and as a crucible of extraordinary talent. The conflict of 1971 itself saw exceptionalism of various hues, from tales of raw courage and sheer valor to those of stoic bravery, grit and glory, camaraderie, great stories of soldierly honor and chivalry, sophisticated combat skills, sound strategic planning, and deep institutional resolves. There are many heroes of 1971, Lance Naik Albert Ekar, Flying Officer Nirmaljit Singh Sekhon, Major Hoshiar Singh, Second Lieutenant Arun Khetrapal, Lieutenant General Hanuj Singh, Brigadier Kuldeep Singh Chandpuri, Lieutenant General J.F.R. Jacob, Lieutenant General Inder Gill, Lieutenant General Jamjit Singh Arora, the Chief of the Naval Staff Admiral S.M. Nanda, Air Chief Marshal P.C. Lal, scores of other soldiers, sailors, and airmen that distinguished themselves in diverse roles, domains, and battles. In the Battle of Basantar, the Battle of Longewala, the Tangail airdrop, the establishment of the heli bridge across River Meghna, and Operation Trident, the bombing of Karachi, being some of the more prominent battles. The statecraft of the political leadership of the day and the skills of the diplomatic corps, as also the wider bureaucracy, were equally salient. But the contribution of the Manekshaw Sagat Jugalbandi, if I may describe the relationship as such, to the 1971 victory and the larger cause of India's national security is indeed profound. So that is the focus of my talk today, the burden of my song. We shall reflect upon the combat personas of the two generals, their quaint relationship, and their rather unique collaboration. Why together, in my humble view, they symbolize the gold standard in Indian military leadership. That is what we'll be talking about today. Allow me to begin with Sam Manekshaw, the iconic Sam Manekshaw, a great institution builder and the architect of India's greatest and most comprehensive military victory in modern times. When asked to enunciate the traits of a good military leader, did not parrot virtues like hard work, sincerity, resoluteness, loyalty, uprightness, etc. Important though these attributes are, but had this rather perplexing comment to make on military leadership. He who neither drinks, he said, nor smokes, nor dances, nor philanders. He who preaches and even occasionally practices piety, temperance, and celibacy could be a saint or a Mahatma, or more likely a humbug, but he certainly won't make a good military leader, or for that matter, a good soldier. So was the field marshal espousing the cause of smoking, drinking, and philandering? Unlikely. Was he being flippant? No. In his characteristic manner, the field marshal was outlining a philosophical outlook for combat leadership, to which an outgoing, carefree, devil-may-care attitude, a certain vigor, dash, elan, as also an irreverential, questioning demeanor was central. Certainly more germane than a saintly, preachy, straight and narrow, rule-bound manner which he described as humble. Now such a visage, however, was just one small part of the larger Manekshaw magic, whose great substantiveness and gravitas somehow tends to get masked, lost in the flamboyance of his public demeanor. This is something that I must underline because it is important, even critical to the understanding of Manekshaw, the man, his life, and his times. If you do not understand Sam Manekshaw's very substantive contributions to Indian defense and national security, you will come up with unfortunate conclusions, as Ambassador Chandrasekhar Dasgupta does in his recent book, India and the Bangladesh Liberation War, where he undermines Manekshaw's substantive role in helping Prime Minister Indira Gandhi arrive at the right moment for conflict initiation in 1971. Not a hurried launch, but one that was professionally planned and carefully orchestrated. That is very far from the truth, as we shall soon see. The racketeering that Mr. Dasgupta also refers to was merely the icing on the Manekshaw cake. The cake itself was both tasty and nutritious. What some believe to be racketeering was in fact an outcome of Manekshaw's self-effacing manner, whereby he tended to make light of even very weighty issues with some witty, chatty banter. In reality, however, at the heart of Sam's persona lay a prodigious capacity for hard work. Yes, hard work, great equity, intelligence, wisdom, what we call vivek in Hindi, incisiveness, a great eye for detail, an acute sense of right and wrong, tremendous energy, ready wit and humor, was also extraordinary gallantry. In 1942, he saw action in Burma in the Battle of the Satang Ridge, where he took 9 bullets in the lung, liver and kidneys and was awarded the Military Cross for Gallantry. The Military Cross for Gallantry. The Australian surgeon whom Sam was brought to declined to operate on him, citing little chance of survival. He asked Sam as to what had happened. "A bloody mule kicked me," said Sam. "By Jove, you have a sense of humor. You deserve to be saved," replied the surgeon. He went on to operate, removing much of Sam's intestines. Later, Sam's father wrote to him, "Son, if you smoke or drink, you are finished." Sam told a friend a couple of months later, "Well, I did exactly that. I drank and I smoked, and so I survived." Many years later, Sam was asked to recount as to how he got the Military Cross. Lesser mortals, if asked the same question, would likely have adopted a pompous tone and recalled at great lengths the details of their bravery, fearlessness, and valor. Not Sam, who responded with typical self-effacing wit. "Oh, we walked into a bloody ambush," he said. "The buggers pumped 9 bullets into me and I fell unconscious. They thought I wouldn't live, so they gave me the Military Cross. I lived and became the famous Sam Manekshaw Military Cross." Please also consider carefully, is this glib racketeering or self-effacing wit? Should this in any way subtract from Sam's proven gallantry? I leave it to your better judgment. Such incidents also reveal certain traits of military leadership which Sam would go on to refine, perfect, and use with great effect in the years to come. Profound substantiveness in terms of the needs relevant to the phase in his professional life. Bravery, gallantry in the initial years, and deep professional competence later, always laced with great pluck, dash, and self-effacedness. Sam bore his successes lightly and underplayed his achievements, always under-promising, constantly over-delivering, and often making light of his phenomenal successes. He would make the most of opportunities, using his ready wit and presence of mind to charm his opponents and surmount the greatest of obstacles. Realizing very early that life was essentially a close shave, risk-taking became an essential arrow in his quiver, replicated many years later in the supposed face-off with Prime Minister Indira Gandhi over conflict initiation in 1971. There was a thin line, he would recall, between dismissal and becoming a field marshal. He was a great leader, even in times of acute adversity. Sam had a very strong sense of self-esteem, deep convictions, great impatience with red tape, the ability to move from failure to failure without loss of enthusiasm, a penchant for real combat. In his own words, the Chinese came to his rescue in 1962, he said, to resurrect a career in relative oblivion at Staff College. These were some of the standout attributes in his persona. Apart from being a skilled communicator, Sam also displayed great persistent charm and resolve. He was the CDS in 1971, not de jure but de facto, since no one was formally appointed, merely because of his ability to carry the 3 services and the formidable Delhi bureaucracy with him, integrate defense policy and plans, as also achieve remarkable strategic military synergy. He was able to marshal the concept of sovereignty in determined pursuit of national interest, despite formidable opposition from the USA. We all know about the threatening maneuvers of the 7th Fleet in the Bay of Bengal and China, which made some very disconcerting moves along the border, while concurrently displaying great ability to lead and inspire in the field, visiting troops on the ground, checking on their needs, raising their morale, etc., etc. He was as skilled in the affairs of Delhi as he was adept in the field. Sam was always substance over style. He, however, created and crafted a style which enabled his great substantiveness to flourish quite effortlessly. Great guts, a phenomenal risk-taking ability, and considerable powers of persuasion. These were some of the more remarkable qualities that define Sam as a man, a soldier, and the General and Field Marshal we all came to know. He had a great sense of right and wrong. I'll recall to you an episode from the Ministry of Defense when one day he walks into a room on the heels of the then Defense Secretary Harish Sareen. And he hears and sees Harish Sareen telling a colonel, "You there, will you please open those curtains?" And Sam, in his typical loud voice, said, "You sit down." And when Mr. Harish Sareen was trying to offer an apology and saying that he didn't actually mean to be rude, Sam Manekshaw said, "I don't care what you meant, I heard what you said and I didn't like it." And this was his great sense of right and wrong. And this was Sam the man. But his ability to speak truth to power, sometimes controversially so, was a typical characteristic of Sam Manekshaw. After 71, a journalist once asked a question on the Indian Army's patriotism and nationalism, and Sam said that the Indian Army Jawan fights for his battalion, for his regiment, and not necessarily for the nation. It may have been a trifle indiscreet, but it revealed his great faith in the strengths of our regimental system, which we all know is a wonderful nursery for training, for shaping of our ethos, and therefore our operational preparedness. So Sam never held back his punches. He always spoke out openly about what he thought was right. Sam created and practiced a unique brand of leadership, in my view, imbued in the Indian genius, tailored to the unique circumstance. He articulated and practiced an urbane form of military leadership, a self-created construct based on original application of mind, entirely original. And that is why I say leadership cannot be taught. A great sense of self-belief, a very clairvoyant view of the military's role in defense. He was always pragmatic. No humbug, that was simply not the man. Never preachy, but he had a style that exuded a certain majesty, both in deportment and action. He had a very elevated view and a refined sense of apoliticality. When asked as to whether the Indian Army was apolitical or not, he said, "Well, we are deeply politically conscious, but consciously not politically committed." If you reflect on this very statement, it is a very, shall I say, elevated view, because it says that, of course, we understand politics, but we've taken a conscious decision not to commit ourselves to any political leader. So he was a man who had a deep understanding of the prevalent politico-military realities, and he was always rooted in the real world. The question is also asked, is Sam revered as a military leader because he was so successful? Or did the alchemy of leadership attributes in his persona lead to his great success? We could think about it, but in my view, I suspect it is the latter. He was indeed a remarkably astute military strategic leader, somebody who wore his considerable talent, wisdom, and capacity lightly. He was flamboyant, yet self-effacingly humble, unsparingly frank and fearless. He never succumbed, and please note, never succumbed either to the pull of political correctness or to the push of conventional wisdom. Sam was always original. He was never a good boy to the politico-bureaucratic complex, but he was invaluable to the nation's security interests. In the process, he created a genre and brand of his own. Now, what are the lessons from the Manekshaw phenomenon? Well, I think he practiced in the military profession a mantra that is very close to what in the corporate world we say, differentiate or die, because his leadership always exuded a certain uniqueness. There was never a leader like Sam before him, and there will never be a leader like Sam after him. So when we remember Sam and recall his great contributions and worth, we may like to emulate not the overt flamboyance, which was a typical characteristic of Sam, but the more latent substantiveness. That is what we must capture from Sam and tailor it to our own unique genius while leveraging the same for organizational betterment and growth, as Sam Manekshaw so assiduously did. Let us now turn to that other lodestar of the Indian military, Sagat Singh, who rivals Manekshaw, but in distinctly different ways. For when it comes to what in Hindi they call Yudh Kaushal, combat leadership, combat genius, or sheer talent for war, as the biographer of General Sagat Singh, Major General Randhir Singh, so eloquently puts it, when it comes to sheer talent for war, there is none as remarkable and fascinating as General Sagat Singh. Sagat is of course a combat legend. His exploits are an intrinsic part of Indian military folklore, but there are a few other compelling reasons which makes General Sagat stand out far above the rest in terms of combat accomplishments. In war, like in any two-sided match, it is said that the odds of winning or losing are equal. But Sagat beat all odds because he won each time that he fought, from the campaign to liberate Goa in 1961 to the fight back in Nathula in 1967, the Mizo insurgency thereafter, and of course the crowning glory in 1971, while spearheading the dash of 4 Corps to Dhaka. Sagat was always the unyielding commander, willing to fight wars uncompromisingly and always to a victorious end. Indian military history, tradition and lore has somehow tended to emphasize valor over victory. Valor over victory. So right from Porus to Prithviraj Chauhan to Maharana Pratap to even Rani Lakshmi Bai, they were all valorous, but they all unfortunately lost their battles. Not Sagat. He was the eternal victor. He always won. He was valorous and victorious. Veer or Vijay. The winning streak was always his because he understood very early in his combat career, unlike many before him, कि जंग जो है वो असूलों की लड़ाई नहीं है, बल्कि जंग का एक ही असूल है, जीत. Somewhat in the manner of General Patton, who in a different strategic context asserted that you don't win wars by dying for your country, but by making the other, and he used a certain expletive which I won't, by making the other dash die for his country. Sagat's achievements in war also won him a great deal of international acclaim. They have stirred comparisons with stellar campaigns and combat legends of great renown. London's Sunday Times, for example, in its edition of 12th December 1971, had this to say about the dash to Dhaka, in which General Sagat's 4 Corps played a lead role. It took only 12 days, said the editorial, for the Indian Army to smash its way to Dhaka, an achievement reminiscent of the German blitzkrieg across Poland and France in 1940. The strategy, the editorial said, and the characteristics were the same: speed, ferocity, and flexibility. Now, the blitzkrieg, as any student of warfare will tell you, was a path-breaking style of military maneuvers predicated on speed, mass, envelopment, and smart technological leveraging that the Germans mastered through their offensives across Western Europe. That Sagat could orchestrate similar combat metrics and operational finesse in the dash to Dhaka speaks volumes of the combat genius of the man. Those of us in olive greens know that the Indian Army spends a great deal of time, often a lifetime, discussing operational art, its purpose, its deeper nuances, the many theories and associated tenets. I doubt if General Sagat ever delivered a talk on the subject. Always the doer, he merely practiced it. In 1971, in the dash to Dhaka, with consummate ease and unprecedented success. Little wonder, therefore, that Major General V.K. Singh, in his book Leadership in the Indian Army, Biographies of 12 Soldiers, compares General Sagat once again with the legendary American General George Patton that I just spoke about. Now, is such comparison justified? For after all, Eisenhower described Patton as a master of fast and overwhelming pursuit, is also the finest leader in military pursuit that the United States Army has ever known. So it's a very tall proposition by way of comparison indeed. But how relevant is the comparison? Well, well-known historian and commentator, American historian and commentator, Thomas Ricks tells us that Patton excelled in the singular task of military pursuit, no doubt, but he was hounding a fatigued, retreating enemy. Sagat's dash to Dhaka, on the other hand, was not only superior in design, but also far more difficult to execute and therefore gritty. The logistical orchestration of 4 Corps from Tezpur to Agartala was as much an uphill task as the many operational difficulties and challenges that followed. They were a series of riverine enclaves, impossible terrain, all against a dogged and entrenched enemy unwilling to yield ground. It was not that the Pak army in East Pakistan crumbled at the very onset. General Niazi is now, of course, known as the man who helmed the humiliating Pakistani surrender at Dhaka. But what we forget is that Niazi had done exceptionally well in the Battle of Chavanda in 1965, where he was awarded the Hilal-e-Jurrat. He was an incredibly ambitious general, as also a gallant soldier, certainly not a pushover. So the adversary enterprise, the Pak enterprise in East Pakistan, was formidable indeed. The Battle of Dhalai, for instance, to break the crust of the Pakistani defences in East Pakistan, was a grim and bloody encounter in which Sagat suffered many adversities. It was characterized by a series of debacles. There were 6 scrappy failed attacks, several bloody operations. It saw the sacking of numerous commanders. Sagat himself was desolate. At one time he thought that he might not break the crust, let alone get to Dhaka. It took great grit and combat resolve to break the crust and progress operations thereafter. Sagat, therefore, in my view, because he had to overcome far greater operational adversity, was the more complete general and a more adroit practitioner of maneuver warfare. Greater, arguably so, than even the legendary George Patton. Now that is saying a lot. In the Indian landscape, he is definitely unmatched. Globally, he compares favorably with the best in the business. That is what makes Sagat such a great combat icon. Interestingly, how would General Sagat compare or relate with that other dominant military persona of those times, the man we just discussed, Field Marshal Sam Manekshaw? There may be no firm empirical evidence, but my own historical inference is that in some ways the duo enjoyed a strong mentor-mentee relationship. Through all of Sagat's journeys through Nathula, the Mizo insurgency and the race to Dhaka, Sam was his mentor. And in other ways, they complemented each other, even though they were diverse personalities. They complemented each other wonderfully to the collective good of Indian defense. We were lucky to have both Sam and Sagat in those critical apex positions in our military hierarchy, when the nation was bracing up to some of the most formidable challenges in its history. They proved not only equal to the task, but they were transformative actors in India's national security frame. The leadership of Sam and Sagat must not be viewed in narrow silos, but by the manner in which their differing attributes and virtues coalesced and came together in the service of national security. It was the great Jugalbandi that I spoke about that enabled the Indian nation not only to register one of its most comprehensive military triumphs against our Western adversary, but also regain in significant ways its lost strategic advantage vis-a-vis the northern adversary. Take India's victory of 1971, for instance. Sagat and Sam operated in different domains. Manekshaw in the strategic military realm. He was the CDS that, as I said, India never had, influencing the larger questions of war and peace, the political-military equations, conflict initiation, in synergizing the Delhi bureaucracies. Interestingly, he enjoyed wonderful relationships with the top bureaucrats of those times, P.N. Huxer, T.N. Kaul, D.P. Dhar, P.N. Dhar, and L.P. Singh. Sam's way with the media, his charisma, his energy, and contagious enthusiasm galvanized the entire war effort of the nation. But honestly, what would all of that have come to without Sagat's adeptness at the military hardball? His facility with the nuts and bolts of delivery in the field. Because do remember that as GOC-4 Corps, Sagat was the architect of the only decisive corps-level campaign in India's post-independence history. One that led to the surrender of over 90,000 Pakistani soldiers and to the birth of a new independent nation of over 100 million people. Or let me put it even more plainly. If there had been no Sagat Singh, there would have been no Dhaka and possibly no Bangladesh. That then is the measure of the duo's operational heft in the larger trajectory of South Asia's geopolitical destiny. Not insignificant in any way, both with regard to the military metrics and the larger strategic outcomes. Sample this. The dash to Dhaka involved a grueling military traverse of more than 650 kilometers over 12 days across very challenging terrain, quite a feat by itself. Yet it was accomplished. It was the greatest military victory that India has seen in over 2,000 years. Also leading to the biggest mass surrender of troops since World War II, 93,000 POWs. You can't change your neighbors, goes an old diplomatic adage. We all hear of it very often. 1971 proved that you can change your neighbor. A new nation state was created by the deft use of the instrument of force. In an era dominated by the narrative and reality of the Cold War, nuclear deterrence, balance of terror, etc., etc., whence it was widely believed that all military conflicts would end in stalemates. That's what makes the Bangladesh campaign so different, so salient, so significant, especially because it led to a very decisive outcome. In hindsight, it also helped the Bangla people escape from the clutches of their older sibling, a failing state and an obscurantist ideology, enabling the nation created in consequence, Bangladesh, metamorphosed into the economic miracle that it is today. Professor Ishrat Hussain, Pakistan's foremost economist, tells us that Bangladesh, once dubbed as a basket case by Henry Kissinger, today its national income has grown 50 times, its per capita income has grown 25 times. Its exports have grown 100 times, and poverty levels in Bangladesh today are down to 20% from 60% in 1990. Truly Sunar Bangla. The military campaign to liberate Bangladesh, therefore, was truly a momentous event, an unparalleled act of physical and economic liberation, made possible, of course, by an overarching and very wise Indian grand strategy, the calibrated use of every instrument of national power, political, diplomatic, economic, strategic, and military, one in which there were many actors, yet the contributions of Sam Manekshaw and Sagat Singh, for reasons that I have stated, stand out. The Jugalbandi, in fact, predates the 1971 finale, the finest star, as some would say, by a decade, with the duo contributing critically and in substantive measure to an even greater cause, the strategic rejuvenation of a defeated, humiliated, desolate Indian army along the Himalayan borders in the wake of the 1962 debacle against China. Look at this. Then, 1962, Lieutenant General Sam Manekshaw is rushed on promotion from the academic environs of Wellington to head the Fort Corps in Tejpur, a ghost town after the Chinese offensive. Immediately on assuming command, in order to restore confidence, he gives orders for troops to advance and reoccupy the positions that they had lost up on the LAC, with his famous orders to his commanders and officers. "Gentlemen, I have arrived," he said. "Henceforth there will be no withdrawals." Soon after, within a week actually, Sam is visited in his headquarters by Prime Minister Nehru, Indira Gandhi, then a nobody in government, but after all Nehru's daughter, and General J.N. Chaudhary, the Chief of Army Staff. When Nehru is briefed about plans to reoccupy posts along the LAC, he reacts strongly, saying that he wants no more provocations, no further hostilities, and certainly no more soldiers killed. Sam, however, sticks to his guns and says that he either be allowed to command the corps the way he deems fit, or he would be happy to go back to Wellington. It is Indira Gandhi, ironically, who comes to Sam's rescue, telling her father that at a time when most generals were fleeing, here was someone willing to stand up and fight, and that he, Sam, deserved the government's full support, thus allowing Sam Manekshaw to set the tone and tenor off, take the first baby steps, and lay the conceptual frame for the Indian Army's confidence building and renewal vis-a-vis our northern adversary. It was also here notably that the tempestuous but productive relationship between Sam and our Prime Minister in later years, Srimati Indira Gandhi, would take root and grow ultimately into one of great mutual respect, trust, even admiration. But it was Sagat yet again in Nathula in 1966-67 who would give flesh and form to the conceptual frame of strategic rejuvenation against the Chinese by demonstrating to his troops and the wider nation through a series of bold actions in Nathula that the Chinese were not in fact 9 feet tall, laying the incremental basis for later developments and events such as Sumandrong Chu, exercises Checkerboard and Divine Matrix, the raising of the Mountain Strike Corps, and most recently the demonstration of great operational resolve in Doklam and Galwan. The complementary effect of the military personas of Sam Manekshaw and Sagat Singh in forging a strategic dynamic that gave India one of its most comprehensive victories against the Western adversary in all of our history, while concurrently scripting the basis for our strategic military rejuvenation against China, is possibly the most seminal contribution of the duo, Sam and Sagat, to the fortification of our national security posture, a fact which in my view is not adequately appreciated. The other point that I would like to emphasize about the leadership and personas of Sam and Sagat is their great value in busting some commonly held myths about the military. The common view, for example, that the military is somewhat dull, dour and straitjacketed, that it encourages sheep that slavishly follow rules. For Sagat and Sam, like many other astute military professionals, were no sheep. They were in fact free-thinking goats, always unconventional, imaginative, creative, and very innovative. Far from slavishly following rules, Sam and Sagat, somewhat in the manner of Lord Krishna, often bent rules, skirted them, sometimes went on to buck and defy them, while always staying true to the larger principle of dharma. Not because they intended to be churlishly cocky, but on the contrary because they were deeply substantive. गंभीर थे वो दोनों, बड़ा ठहराव था उनके चरित्र में. It would be a mistake to dub Sam as merely flamboyant or Sagat as rash or obstinate. They both were determined and resolute in pursuit of the larger cause, qualities rooted in deep combat insights and driven by a rare amalgam of intellect and moral courage. This, in my humble view, is a profound commentary on the higher order leadership attributes that was central to Field Marshal Manekshaw's and General Sagat's personas. So if the larger strategic good demanded, as in the Nathula crisis of 1966-67, that the watershed be held at Nathula, Sagat made sure it was held at all costs, even though the formation plans allowed him to fall back to the comfort of the main defenses in Cham. So today Nathula is with us, while Jalipla is with the Chinese. In pursuit of the larger dharma, he was always unmindful of the other consequences, major and minor provocative actions that disturb the safer status quo. Us samay, in 1967, in those tense times, what Sagat did in taking on the Chinese, वो सांप की पूंछ पर पैर रखने के समान था. But Sagat did precisely that. In pursuit of the larger good, Sagat did not refrain from acting, always unmindful, as I said, of the consequences. Even in Shillong, Sagat's spirit was indomitable, his resolve unbroken. He seized yet another opportunity that came his way, even in those backwaters, turning around the flow of events in the Mizo-insurgency very comprehensively. A similar propensity would punctuate his leadership years later during the arduous and critical dash to Dhaka. Even as the operational instructions from Headquarters Eastern Command to Sagat were explicit to secure up to the line up to the river Meghna and not go beyond, Sagat, I suspect, decided in his own mind that if he did get to the Meghna, he would cross. So on that fateful night, when Sagat began crossing the Meghna and his boss, Lieutenant General Jaggi Arora, queried Sagat as to why he was defying orders, General Sagat had this to say. Sir, he said, I am a co-commander. It is my job to exploit opportunities. I see opportunities beyond, and I shall make the most of them. And he proceeded to cross the Meghna, a river 4 times broader than the river Rhine, thus giving the much-needed fillip to the race for Dhaka. Now the moot point is this. Did Sagat's defiance of orders tantamount to insubordination, or was such defiance a byproduct of deep strategic clarity and operational conviction? In Sagat's case, I suspect it was the latter, with both bad and good consequences. Nathula bad saw him being eased out to the backwater of the 101 com zone, while the crossing of the Meghna good brought him success, glory, great name and fame. In sum, there is little doubt that Sagat was a leader with his own mind, as also one with a very rare spine. Were they Sam and Sagat merely lucky generals, as some seem to opine and suggest? Well, General Dave Petraeus, when queried similarly, famously quipped that in combat, luck was nothing but preparation meeting opportunity. Sam and Sagat may well have been lucky, but such luck piggybacked on a host of critical attributes to include years of careful preparation that helped them make the most of emergent opportunities. That is leadership. Good generalship, it is also said, is neither a skill set nor a collection of theories and strategies. It is nothing so formulaic. It is not a formula. It is largely about acquiring a discerning gaze to pick up early signs and distinctive moves, not the broad trends that everybody else sees. Smart generals sense the danger, they feel the opportunities. Sam and Sagat possessed such like attributes in abundant measure. Sagat, for instance, was an avid reader of professional journals. He always kept a discerning eye on new operational developments. He would never hesitate to convert as of yet emerging concepts into extant reality. So when heliborne operations as an operational concept was yet to be mooted and discussed in India's professional military colleges on sensing opportunity, Sagat, in concert with Group Captain Chandan Singh, put into effect the operational idea of heliborne operations in live operations, thus adding to the dash to Dhaka a much needed aerial flank. Similarly, risk-taking was a penchant, which may well have begun early in their respective careers as amateur audacious moves. But through deep study and diligent practice, through various operational challenges, the duo honed risk-taking into a fine art that peaked in their stunning stewardship and execution of the dash to Dhaka. Operational clarity was yet another attribute which gave them great power and advantage over their subordinates, peers, and adversaries alike. And finally, good generalship and military leadership, in the ultimate analysis, are largely about the accumulation of practical, rooted combat wisdom, an elusive but fine quality which is then applied with judgment, moment by moment, to an unpredictable flow of situations, opportunities, challenges, and adversities. The original Kamdars, precisely perhaps because, at least in the case of Sagat, he rose from very humble beginnings, he was from the ranks. Even as these Kamdars zoomed to the top, they always remained rooted to the ground. Nazrein chahe unki asmaan par rahi hoon, पैर उनके हमेशा जमीन पर थे. If we were to reflect deeply, this is an attribute that separates the men from the boys, the truly distinguished from the merely competent, Sam and Sagat from the other leading lights of the time. So leaders like Sam and Sagat, ladies and gentlemen, will always be rare. Not paragons of virtue, but generals unique to their times and amongst India's greatest captains of war. In the end, a brief reference to Ambassador Dasgupta's observation in his recent book that it was not Manekshaw who dissuaded Prime Minister Indira Gandhi from launching operations early, but that she merely used him to greenlight a political decision that had already been made months earlier, may also be in order. Well, in my view, Manekshaw's professional military opinion, expressed during that critical meeting in April 71, helped reinforce Mrs. Gandhi's predilection not to launch in a hurry. Her political hunch, her political judgment was fortified further by professional military opinion. And after a brief moment of tension between the two when Indira Gandhi thought he was being impertinent, it turned into a deep conversation in which Sam outlined the many operational difficulties that the monsoons posed. He highlighted the threat from China till the passes closed, the time needed to redeploy equipment in the western borders, how the rivers in Bangladesh would be in spate and why he did not want to get bogged down in an operational quagmire. He pointed out that he was aware of the strains posed on the Indian economy by the 20 million strong refugee influx, yet he asserted that he needed time to prepare in order that victory was assured. He also stated as how he would use the interregnum to initiate guerrilla operations in concert with the Mukti Bahini, which he did, thus laying the operational edifice for the larger conventional assault to follow. At a time when everybody was itching to go in, to include the BSF, I am told, under its very effervescent Director General K.F. Rustamji, The contrarian yet persuasive view expressed by Sam was brave, mature, and wise. The event and the conversations around the same have been recorded by several others, thus reinforcing their authenticity and veracity. To her credit, the Prime Minister heard her chief out, saw the wisdom in Manekshaw's position, and conquered. In consequence, the nation reaped the benefit in terms of one of our most comprehensive military victories in modern times. The interaction between Sam Manekshaw and Prime Minister Gandhi, in my view, reflect maturity in the politico-military relationship of the time. There was also perhaps a strong personal element in the same, one born of mutual regard and respect, a connect that began in Tejpur in 1962, which I spoke about, and blossomed over the years. It was mature and profound. To insinuate otherwise is less than fair. In the ultimate analysis, ladies and gentlemen, great leaders are intelligent souls, men and women of character and diligent workers, silent but resolute in the pursuit of their objectives. Sam Manekshaw and Sagat Singh did not pursue either fame or glory. They merely sought to resolutely achieve objectives assigned to them by life and the course of their careers. With diligence, enabled of course by their fulsome talents, greatness followed. खामोशी से बनाते रहो पहचान अपनी, हवाएं खुद तुम्हारा तराना गुनगुनाएंगी. With these words and thoughts, allow me to conclude. Thank you very much for a patient hearing. Jai Hind.
Coming to a close, we now request Lieutenant General T.S. Shergill, Chairman of Military Literature Festival Association Chandigarh, to deliver his closing remarks. General Shergill.
Good evening, ladies, gentlemen and children. So we are coming to the end of the 5th Military Literature Festival and hope that in years to come, this festival will grow from strength to strength. We will continue broadcasting to you throughout the ensuing year and hope that by December next year, this pest, that is the viral, would have gone away so that we can hold our carnival and the Military Literature Festival once again on the shores of the Chandigarh lake. It was a momentous occasion, the creation of Bangladesh, and you have been through a fair amount of detail on how it all happened. But how did this victory actually take shape? First of all, it was the injustice done to the people of East Pakistan. And it was not only political, but also there was an unfortunate racial and language bias. The people of West Pakistan thought that the people in East Pakistan were in some way inferior. And they didn't deserve the best. And the best was only in West Pakistan. That, together with denying them justice in the political field, and also carrying out a repression and oppression of the vilest kind, the people of East Pakistan rose up quietly and then with vigor to fight against the tyranny. And that is where India came into the picture. And for India, it was important to shape the campaign. And the shaping of the campaign was done both politically and militarily. The Prime Minister at that time, Mrs. Indira Gandhi, had a difficult time keeping in hand the jingoism within the parliament, because all parliamentarians wanted to at once go for the jugular in Pakistan. But she held them back adroitly and calmly. And at the same time, she visited various countries, putting across the view of India and the people of East Pakistan. But her greatest achievement was to have concluded a treaty of peace and friendship with USSR. And that gave both her and the military planners breathing spell and a chance to do what they could do without interference from other countries. It was important that the battle was won and the campaign was won because India achieved complete air and naval supremacy over East Pakistan. And this eventually led to unconventional operations that could take place that were unhindered in any way by Pakistani air interference or naval interference. One should think and ponder whether this could have been possible without the active support of the peoples of East Pakistan. It would not have been so. Because when in any operation you step into another country, you step into the unknown. And the unknown creates its own fears. As an example, in 1965, in the war between India and Pakistan in the Kemkaran sector, on the 8th of September, 6th Lancers had completely outflanked the defenses of 4 Mountain Division and reached Valtua railway station. And then on the 10th again, 4th Cavalry had again outflanked the whole of the defenses of 4 Mountain Division. But they couldn't hold on because of the power of the unknown. It would have been the same in East Pakistan for the Indian Armed Forces were it not for the fact that the people were with the Indian Armed Forces. They could give information, they could deliver intelligence, and at the same time allow the Indian Army that was supporting the Mukti Bahini to operate freely behind the various positions that the Pakistan Army had taken in that area. Today, if you look at both Pakistan and Bangladesh, you would see a vast difference in their per capita income. The per capita income of Bangladesh has continued to rise because they followed a policy of secularism and inclusiveness and openness to the rest of the world. 2021 was a very significant year in that we were still grappling with the pandemic, which is still in many ways with us. And the other was the change of government that took place in Afghanistan, this time more peacefully than it did last time. We hope that in future there will be peace in most parts of the world and especially in South Asia. The borders of the Indian subcontinent are still alive with tension to the north and to the northwest of India. And we hope that slowly and steadily, rational thought will come to all leaders surrounding India and in the Indian subcontinent so that peace can eventually prevail and commerce start between nations very easily and properly. Well, this is the end of this particular edition of the Military Literature Festival, and I wish that you will join us again in our endeavors throughout this year and certainly in December next year for the 6th edition of the Military Literature Festival. I wish to thank all participants who took part in this particular edition. Many of them had actually fought in the battles of 1971. And I thank, naturally, His Excellency, the Governor of Punjab, the Honorable Chief Minister of Punjab, and of course, our media partners, the Tribune, for the help they've extended us. And I especially want to thank Headquarters Western Command and the GOCNC Western Command, who have always been with us firmly as our partners. Well, to all of you, good night, a Merry Christmas, and a Happy New Year.
Over the last 4 sessions on 11th and 12th and 18th and 19th December, we at the MLF have brought to you tales of valor and sacrifice that epitomize the glorious victory of 71 in this golden jubilee year.
Our focus, therefore, was to bring to you battle narratives through those men who fought them, experienced them, and lived them. These brave veterans, through their trails, leave behind glorious traditions and rich values for the generations to emulate and imbibe. The war in the eastern sector saw us getting you across Meghna, following up with the paradrop at Tangil, and finally the race to Dhaka, as a prelude to the final victory and surrender of Pakistani forces. We also recounted the major naval operations and the airborne operations. Bangladesh thus came into being.
Through General Dipinder and Brigadier Sukhjit, we got first-hand accounts of planning of war and then the run-up to it. At the Western Front, we took you through the battles at Basantar, Longewala and Dera Baba Nanak. We also discussed contemporary issues which encompassed our neighborhood. We analyzed the leadership of 2 extraordinary military leaders, Field Marshal Manekshaw and General Sagat Singh, in a fitting tribute to the 2 men responsible for scripting the victory.
We intend to continue with occasional literary pursuits to cover panel discussions and book releases. We urge our viewers to remain in touch with the events at the Military Literature Festival Association through our website, militaryliteraturefestival.com.
With that, we bring the curtains down on the 5th edition of the Military Literature Festival. We hope that you enjoyed the session that was specially designed for your viewing pleasure. We can only say that we loved having you with us.
So, until next year, when we return with more anecdotes of war, movies, stories of extraordinary bravery, spotlight on facets of Indian military. Thank you for being with us. Good night and Godspeed.
Good night. Thank you.